Namaste, my friends, and welcome to Circle of Wisdom. My name is Christopher Woteki. I call myself the Sensei to Serious Joy. Each week we do a little discussion amongst our friends of light, and we call it the Circle of Wisdom. And we try to keep it onto a certain topic, but we get all over the place, so we appreciate ahead of time for your patience with us. This is broadcasting live at soulgarden.tv, and I'm with my host, or I should say co-host, Christopher One Feather. And also today joining us, hello, Master One Feather, is our special guest, Vincent DiPaula, and from, I believe, Canada, Joelle, correct?
Yeah.
All right, hi, guys. So let's start off, Master One Feather, and talk about the energies of the moment. You have Visions, Dreams, and Insights. That's your series on YouTube, and we have the link, folks, to Master One Feather's series right in our own show description. So if you want to click over and watch what he's done, it's well worth the view. He tends to cycle with the moon, and we're upon a big moon event here in the next 24 hours, a solar eclipse. What say you, sir, Master One Feather, about our times and the energies today?
Well, most of the astrologers out there are putting a lot of emphasis on a new moon and eclipse in Scorpio. And as we know, I have a tendency when we hit that 30th degree of any sign, which is 0 degrees of the next sign.
Yep.
Keep pulling people back and saying, no, it's not going to be fully active in Scorpio until it hits that first degree, 1 degree of Scorpio.
It's invisible.
So this particular new moon cycle is, in fact, doing a lot of end-of-cycle work within that realm of Libra.
I would agree.
And it also is, since Mercury has positioned itself at a stationary point, in other words, it's not going forwards or in retrograde right now. It is getting ready to advance. It's ready to come out of retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
This is the next 3 days is an ideal time to pause and to reflect and to, do the autumn thing. One of my favorite quotes about the season is a young kid. I believe Chad is down in Tennessee. He's a writer and a poet and a musician. And I think he's about 20 or 21 years old now, and he's got 3 books out. He's really a bright lad.
Wow.
But, one of his quotes is, love the trees until their leaves fall off, then encourage them to try again next year.
Mm.
And I think that's really a clear summation of this particular energy that we will be experiencing over the next 3 days is to put our attention on new growth and encourage ourselves to produce, a whole new blossoming cycle as we move into the deeper part of autumn in preparation for winter.
Mm. Well, great wisdom as always, Master One Feather, especially with your tie to the Indians or the natives. That's tied to
the tribal people. Yes.
So true. I have to agree with you. To put it in Hollywood context, in action films, they've got this new, we are all familiar with this new little feature where they'll be going in fast motion, and right before the hero and the villain get together, you have this slow motion of, and you see in slow motion, right, that like where they actually grab for it and how it all turns, and when you get in a car accident or something too, I don't know if I'm sure everyone has been in it, but time, space goes into slow motion. And I kind of feel you've hit it right on the head with Mercury coming to a stop, which is our minds. For those of you who are novice astrologers, Mercury is our thoughts. So our thoughts are coming to this slow moment. And we are, this 0 degree, what I teach with my students is the 0 degree is that space. It's the rest note in music. It's that quiet before the storm. We all are familiar with that deadly quiet. That's the 0 degree, and 0 degree Scorpio is the deadliest of deadliest quiets. And what's interesting about that is I have found that a lot of profound change on Earth happens after a very, very, very spiritually quiet moment, like the one we're about to experience, versus lots of orchestra of the planet. So we're about to have a very quiet moment.
And you're dead on accurate, Christopher, and the reason for that is because our brains are also generators of our experience. Our mind is always creating And whether we are conscious of it or not, that's irrelevant. The reality is the mind is constantly producing stuff around us. So if we can bring the mind into a state of stillness, then that gives allowance for a higher creative force to express itself on our behalf.
Yeah.
So as long as you are thinking and thinking, you're blocking that conduit, and you're failing to fulfill your true, your true identity, because we are expressions of the divine in manifestation. So
Running a
you
program.
tagged that one beautifully.
Yeah, and we're running a program. I mean, I think you said it absolutely correctly. We have to reboot the Matrix every so often. To quote another Hollywood film, we got to reboot the Matrix, and literally, you have to just tell your mind, and everything blinks, and you come back online with that new reality. And meditation really does talk one into that little moment. Now, this is a good segue, because like you said, this particular, it's so beautifully poetic in the poetry of the planets, in the sense that this solar eclipse is at 0 degrees Scorpio, which is a new day. It's a new line in consciousness, or what I call a zero in consciousness. I don't really believe boundaries are lines. I believe boundaries are spheres around us of energy, or zeros, the step 0 degree. And I think this is an interesting line, because astrologically, we are completing our Saturn in Scorpio transit, which is the first time we went through this since the Cold War, and it was in the Saturn Scorpio transit that the Berlin Wall began to come down and whatnot last time. So we're coming to the end of that cycle. We're coming. We're really about to go halfway through the Uranus and Aries cycle, which is a huge redefinition of humankind and Aries masculine energy. And the topic of this show I want to bring up, Jupiter in Leo. Jupiter is in Leo. It's at now 18 degrees, so it's going to go, I think, to 22 before it retrogrades. And Leo is our love energy. Jupiter is God's investment at the moment. I'll also say today that Mars is conjuncting the galactic center, which is kind of interesting, just to add a little drama to it all. And this brings in the topic of the baby boomers, and that's what I want to talk about today, who I call the butterfly generation. And this is an entire generation that was born with Pluto in Leo. And the way I interpret that is a generation who has a past life resume of not protecting their heart. Pluto is basically where we draw a boundary, Scorpio, and Leo is the heart. So you have this entire generation that did not protect their heart in their past lives. And so they were born with an unprotected heart consciousness. Their soul was not being mindful of a boundary with their heart. And then, of course, the way it always works with Creator, they're born to the Pluto Cancer generation, a generation that is inept at emotion. So you have this wounded heart being born to a generation who is inept at emotion, so inept that they can create concentration camps of killing and not think twice in some cases, that generation. And you have this wounded generation of Leo. So in comes in this wounded generation, and we know them as our 60s generation. We know them as a generation of children in their total hearts. Well, of course they're in their hearts. They never protected them. And we all know the story. They kind of went running out into the streets, and God bless your souls, you got hurt.
Well, I think
Go ahead.
I think that those,
time, sir.
yeah, I think that those who were clinging to the old identity were the ones who got hurt. But I think, the point of all this is for us to claim our invulnerability and realize that we can't be hurt. And once we start to step into that realm, then, we become invincible forces. And I think you saw a lot of that with that Pluto in Leo cycle. What do you think, Vincent?
Yeah, Vincent, let me introduce Vincent. Vincent's had a very interesting story. Hello, Vincent, and you are a Leo, sir, Your Majesty.
And Leo rising, I think.
Double Leo.
Double, yeah.
So, what was your experience as a young man? And I want to know your approach to your too, Master One Feather. When you were first out there as a fresh young man, where was your heart? I agree with you, Master One, that we're getting to this point of ascension to that. But as young men, and Vincent, where was your heart as a young man?
I think it was very much in search. I can remember reading a great deal and very wide breadth of subjects, and I took to music as sort of a way of expression, and wound up in my teen years being on the road a lot with different jazz bands as a musician.
Oh, as did for jazz bands. Master One, you did the same thing, did you not?
Well, I followed a lot of music. I was not a participant in the sense of,
A
you
musician.
know, performing. But I think for me, I think that the big thing was that early awakening of my tribal identity as an individual surrounded by a linear culture. And so I really had a strong bond with the group, with my generational group, and I really felt like we were the wave of something unique and indefinable. And of course, the '60s, it did play out that way.
Yeah. And Vincent, you obviously were feeling that connectedness. I mean, you're probably seeking brotherhood connectedness through music, and music was exploding. Neptune had gone through Libra, and so human beings were just downloading crazy music. So when we talk, how young were you when you set out touring around?
I was 15, 16.
That's so.
Yeah, going back and forth from the road back to high school and trying to finish up high school, and then after high school going on to North Texas State University. I majored in music and was drawn out a lot of times, missing whole semesters, being on the road and playing with a lot of big bands. But I agree with Master One Feather. We were, I think, all of us very much searching as a generation, almost at the exclusion of other generations, trying to make a statement for ourselves for what we wanted to do.
And it seemed like there were no limits and nothing held the generation back really for a long time. At what point, Vincent, did you spin off to the spiritual realm? Because you ended up in India yourself. We were talking about this with a guest last week on your own spiritual journey. How did you come to find out about that place without the internet? And how did your heart go from music to spirituality?
Well, in the 60s, it was a unique time for different types of people to get together, and being exposed for the first time, unlike the generation before us that you mentioned, I don't think they had anywhere near the exposure. My mother, for instance, who's now 101 and still alive, never left the state of Connecticut.
Wow.
But we were very different. We traveled all the time, and being exposed to a lot of different ways of thinking and different ways of approaching dealing with life. I think I read a lot and felt there was more than just what I was doing. So when the floods happened in Bangladesh, and George Harrison was playing concerts about it, etc., I decided to take a semester off from school and went over to try and see if I could help in some way.
Huh.
And,
It is again. Master One Feather was telling us last week, just to interject, how he went over to help in Israel. Just the spirit to help. I think that's the baby boomers and your big hearts. But go on, sir.
Yeah. So that led to me. I wanted to take a semester off, but it took 10 years for me to get back to the States. I wound up spending a lot of time in India and China.
Wow, interesting. So you roamed around and you found a guru. Is that how it worked?
Yeah. When I was in India, I even before I went there, knew about the master I wanted to go seek, and spent a lot of time with him, and wound up as a monk, as what they call sannyasi in Sanskrit.
Wow.
And spent a lot of time in prayer and meditation, and ultimately was sent out by him as a missionary and social worker. He was very focused on helping. There was so much poverty in India, but he didn't focus just on one country. He sent people everywhere. So I was sent actually to China first, to Thailand, and then spent time in Hong Kong, and then in Taiwan, and just all around the region, working and teaching, initiating people into meditation, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. And something you don't really find, at least not yet, with our youngsters, and that's one of the reasons why I create TV like this, is to so everyone can kind of see that we have other options out there. And you've served seeing the poorest of the poor, then basically. And you were telling me a story one time. I met this gentleman, by the way, folks. He's a viewer, and he got a reading, and I've been watching his story, which has fascinated me for a long time. But you were telling me a story where you were literally sent out begging at one point.
Yeah, we had several exercises or disciplines that we had to do. Studying yoga, we were very focused on yoga and the practices of meditation. And one thing that I thought was a great exercise that they put us through, I was unaware of it until it started, but they sort of threw us out of an ashram. We were living in a old fort in a place called Chitayapur, just outside of Benares, just off the Ganges River flow right in front of our ashram, and so it was a very small fort, and it's in the middle of the jungle. You have to envision this. There were a lot of crazy animals that I had never seen. I still haven't seen it. But so they said, "Okay, out you go," and they threw us out. They said we could not speak. We couldn't. The only words we could utter was Hari Om Tat Sat, which in Sanskrit means everything is God. There's nothing but God. So we had to beg for our food, and we weren't together. Everyone had to go separately, and we had to sleep where we could sleep and eat what we were given and go village to village. So a lot of poverty, great deal of poverty, broke my heart. And here I am coming from a country that was so well off and begging for food from people, and I was starving. We could only eat once a day. We had to get food, nothing cooked, had to be in the raw. We had to beg for these little pots that are made out of dung, actually, cow dung, and we could cook in them.
Wow.
So we prepared a little bit of rice and whatever we could get, and then that we would eat and then meditate. Just the only thing you could cling to was God. It was
well, it's pretty interesting because, well, I argue, and this is up for our Circle of Wisdom discussion, but I would argue that you were chasing after something in your heart at that time, and in knowing your chart, you're a double Leo, so you have a sun in the 12th house. So, would you feel that you were reliving a past life in that whole experience?
Very much so. It's so odd. I felt like I had come home from the moment I reached India. It was like being back home. It's like from other country. It embraces you. India is so warm, so loving, and the people are very, very loving. Completely counter to what people think. If you go to India, it's a wonderful place.
I believe it. I was, as a young man, I ended up having a bunch of Indian young friends, and the Indian families would invite me into their homes always, to always have dinner and always to do prayer with them, and they always had me over to sleep over, and were so loving to me as a young man, treated me so much better than my, quote, white friends' parents did or anything. And I always had this affinity as well. But I don't know if I spent a past life there. It's interesting. But do you think, looking back, and I'm bringing it back to the baby boom generation to help people out there to understand, because I believe the baby boom is resolving at this point with Jupiter and Leo. I think they're at a cycle with Jupiter crossing their natal Plutos. Somewhere in the next year, everyone born in the baby boom generation will come to some resolution of the heart and come up to a new cycle and circle of healing. Do you believe at that young age that you were closing off some sort of past life wound or something with your heart?
I think definitely. Yeah, I felt a great lack of feeling of belonging anywhere, I think, until I met my guru, and then I knew right where I had to be at that time. It really filled me up for the first time in my life, I think. Filled me up. And the lessons he taught, how to let go of everything, as Master One Feather said at the beginning, you have to let go of everything except God, and then you become a pure channel of it. You know, I think that's very well expressed in the tarot, in the card of the magician, where he gets out of the way and just becomes a conduit for what's above and what's below.
That sounds like an excellent segue to Master One Feather. And I was going to ask you, Master One Feather, for comparison, sir, you went off, to reiterate just a little bit, you went off to Israel and Japan, off on your own spiritual sabbatical. What were you chasing after in your heart, looking back, or not? What was
Well, I
driving you in
think
your
that
heart? Go ahead.
I think that a lot of us were just being stampeded um, at the time by the forces that were going on as far as transformation. We knew that the things that we were experiencing in the American culture were had started to go in the wrong direction, had started to go downhill, and so um, we were on a quest, probably stimulated first by prevailing culture that surrounded us. Number two, we were at the age range where we were able to really review what had happened with World War I and then the Korean War. And if you'll remember, in the late 60s, 70s, that's when MASH was on television. Everybody was talking about Korea. So there was a lot of angst about how conflict was the apparent nature of man and how we were unable to get out of that ongoing cycle of conflict. And I think I think that was the core for a lot of my generation going on quests, and we started to examine spirituality as an alternative to politics and religion. And so a lot of us dumped mainstream Christianity. We went off on Eastern religion bents. I know for me, I was also attracted to all three of the Abrahamic religions because I found them to be so much of a dichotomy. You find the religious aspect of Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, and you also find embedded within that a secret world of mystical experience. And I think the mystical experience was what it was that was compelling our generation to find an alternative, to look more deeply into the process of living and come to a different conclusion about what life consists of.
Oh, very, very true. And the mystical, too, I have to say, for those who went down the drug path, it was still also that mystical question as well, part of that archetype and exploration that we saw as well. And this is what I'm going to lay out. Jupiter was in Leo in 1966. So I don't know if you men have memory of that year. So,
oh, yeah.
Oh, do you really?
Oh, God.
What's her name,
yes.
Master One Feather? What's her name? No, I'm kidding. No, go ahead. I'm
Well,
sorry.
no, it actually was, for me, it was coming full circle, because in December of 66, or no, in July of 66, on July 4th, I landed in Vietnam. And that was a huge awakening.
That is baby boomer cliche as it gets.
Yes. Vincent, when did you end up in the military? India?
You weren't in the military, though, were you, sir? What were you doing there as a military?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you were?
Well, I was in the Army. I was a CO, conscientious objector. So I refused to carry a gun, but nonetheless I was willing to go through the process because, I had not experienced anything that was going on there directly. And the way my convoluted little brain works is I really can't get on board with protesting something that I haven't experienced. It's all word of mouth. So I felt like I needed to surrender to that experience, and I feel like it was a very powerful experience for me because I was surrounded by people who were, trying to express the most negative aspects of the masculine energy. And I could always pinpoint their most vulnerable realm in their own consciousness and manage to punch that button 2 or 3 times a day frequently, because I was such a dichotomy of almost surrealistic elements. I was a conscientious objector. I'd had a strong relationship with relatives who were Quakers, interestingly enough, who were very nonviolent people. And at the same time, my father was a tool and die maker and an engineer, and he created a lot of things, but he made his own weaponry. He made his own rifles, and I, would go hunting with him, and I was an excellent shot with a rifle. I was when I was in the military, I, got well beyond my marksman badge, but
So you
I
had
was, I was really an enigma for that group, and I think that's what a lot of us who were starting to wake up at an early point ended doing. We became enigmas to those around us, which caused them to question what it was that they were holding on to and what their belief was.
Okay, and I agree, that was absolutely true, but at some point the story changes because, Vincent, comes back. At some point you come back, Master Von Feather, obviously you come back. Seems like there's a point when the baby boomer made a turn towards a conservatism. And after 66, the next time we had a dose of Jupiter in Leo was 1978. So in 66, your generation had the opportunity to heal its heart. In 78, it had another circle of light to heal its heart. And you can see that boost of energy in 78 because even I have clear memories as an early child in the 70s. It was like we were working out, that love generation was working out the government, working out issues in the government. Then there's the White House, there's Nixon, let's fix it, we bring in Carter. And really I think that bringing in Carter, a Libra, which I don't even know if we had another Libra president in the history of the United States, I think almost was that second Jupiter in Leo boom. But it's interesting is in that second boom in 78, it seems like a lot of baby boomers then went way left, went way right, went conservative, settled down, had kids, got divorced, and there was this sudden turn. So, Vincent, do you remember that moment?
Yeah, actually, it's strange you say that because I was a monk for 10 years, and as I mentioned to you, so when I reached India, it was 1973, the beginning of 1973, and I was just 21 years old at the time, or 22, I think, just becoming. And so all of that time, I traveled through Thailand. I also sort of followed Master One Feather, and I went into Laos and Cambodia trying to put people back together. During that time, I was working from some of the monasteries, some of the temples, the Buddhist temples. I lived in temples, etc. But yeah, it was almost exactly 1978 when everything changed in my psyche. Things were completely different at the time. I did meet my this person, and I married her, and we wound up going just about in the same direction. It took me till 1982 still. I opened a photo studio in Hong Kong for a while, and we worked there for about 2 years, 3 years, and then in 82 came back to the States. But it was 78 when I left, yeah.
Master One, any 78 recollections? Turning of corner, changing of heart at that point? Oops, for some reason you're muted, Master One. You have to unmute yourself. I think you might have.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so, I make so many bizarre sounds here that I don't want to interrupt the program. But 78 wasn't a particularly significant year for me. I think in the timeline that I was experiencing, August of '69 was a huge, huge year, I think, for all of the baby boomers who are in North America, because in '69 we had Woodstock, which was that final performance of unified consciousness. That's when we had really identified ourselves as a movement and as a phenomenon. But then, astrologically speaking, something very interesting happened. In 1970, Neptune flipped out of Scorpio and landed in Sagittarius. And I think that was the huge, huge next step event in my life. When Neptune landed in Sagittarius, there was the deepest level of a quest and a need for understanding, and that was when I really began to want to make my spirituality practical and workable. And for me, I went off on the that avenue of the New Thought movement and the the metaphysical community that had been, initiated back in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, where you had Mary Baker Eddy and all those people that were subsequent, who said you don't have to be sick. Your spirituality can heal your body. And that was something I found to be very compelling. For me to sit in, under the Bodhi tree, I can understand it, I can relate to it, but for me it was much more of a thing of, well, how can I take my spiritual path and make it applicable to the events and circumstances in my life? And I think a lot of us were really trying to get our grounding and make spirituality a practical process, because previous generations, is go to church on Sunday and then
punch a time clock. Yeah.
Screw your neighbor on Monday.
Neptune went into Sag in November 1970, for the record. November 1970 is when it hit. And I have to say, I was born Neptune in Sag, so my parents are both Pluto-Leo generation, and in the 70s, that's when they picked up the Seth Speaks and all of the channeling your reality and the fundament of what I know as spirituality today. I'm a Neptune Sag natal. Didn't you say you went into the monastery in 1970, Vincent? Is that correct? Or
73.
73, okay. When I was born, I'll take credit for that, sir. And so we get this Jupiter and Leo investment in 1978, and I think a lot of baby boomers choose love, just like you did, Vincent, and choose love for themselves, not for others. So one of the things I've witnessed in my study of astrology is that each time Jupiter hits a sign, it's like an inner or outward expression of it. So you can identify your cycle. So I would say that the 66 was an outward expression of Jupiter and Leo. 78, Jupiter goes back inward again. And so it's an inward expression. And a lot of baby boomers got married and chased after their heart and started having kids. My parents had already had 3 kids by the 80s. But we're still dealing with that. 1 out of 2 of you get divorced, which is a total new thing, and that has to deal with drawing boundaries with the heart, creating lines with the heart. Your baby boom generation was the first to get divorced, and then that brings us to 1989, if I'm not mistaken, which is the next investment that we get, if I'm not mistaken here. I'm gonna of Jupiter and Leo, 89, 90, basically 1990, which I think was an outer expression, because this was the pre-Clinton time now. Which was the first baby boomer president. So do you guys remember a shift in 89, 90 then of where your heart was going back and forth? For many, maybe that was when the divorce proceedings started. And Joel, we'll get to you, sir. You've just been born recently in this timeline. You and I get to talk at some point. Vincent, where were you? Where was your heart 89, 90?
Well, it's amazing because your timeline is so accurate. For me, I had been, when I left the monastery, I had to do something, so I became a photographer and did a lot of photojournalistic work and also commercial work around Asia. And then in '89, I made a shift to computers, the natural evolution from my studio, because I brought some Macintoshes into the studio, and it was at '89 when I first was introduced to Apple and started to go down the path of technology that we were talking about and into the corporate world.
So true, and that is so typical baby boomer. You went from artist to like Steve Jobs, took your a lot like Steve Jobs. Like he was interested, for instance, in calligraphy and stuff. Took that into the Mac, and baby boomers brought a lot of that amazing spiritual worldview and all that stuff into technology. So you ended up working for Apple, right?
Yeah, I was for several years. I was their international spokesperson. When Steve came back to Apple, they sent me through Europe and all through South America and China, Far East. I keynoted the first Taiwan Macworld.
Really? That's so cool.
I had to deliver it in Chinese too. It was very funny.
Really? And so what? So you had, I'm just curious. Back then in Silicon Alley's resume, what was on your resume that attracted Macintosh? Was it that you had been a monk?
No, I think that just the general ambiance of the Macintosh, it drew you. It was more creative. It was more visual. and you saw it as an extension of yourself right away. You knew you were more invested in what it would be than what it was at the time.
That's
Steve
true.
was such a powerful personality. When we were around him, we used to say he had a distortion field. So when he called you over, if you came into the distortion field and he explained something to you, it made perfect sense. But as soon as you walked about 20 feet away, you said, "What was he talking about?"
I always wondered what that distortion field was. So I always wondered, was that distortion field that Steve was in his own world and everyone was trying to get on, or you say he brings you into that distortion and then he leaves?
I didn't spend that much time with him. I was really abroad the entire time that he was here. I was outside the country, but he did look at all of our presentations. He was very, very hands-on. He was very exact with what had to be done, just to the point where I remember once I left to deliver a very important speech at the Palladium in London to a group of 300 artists in the London area, and I had my plan of what I was going to do all rehearsed. I landed in London, and I got a note at the door. Actually, Jeff Martin, who I was traveling with, got a note at the door, "Come back," from Steve, and he had to go all the way back and get it, and then bring it back, and we changed the whole thing. So he was very, very hands-on. He knew everything that was going on.
Steve called you back to the United States. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Jeff went back to the United States.
That's interesting. And I would say, Apple Computer is like I love Apple, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I think to some degree you have that in the machine, a bit of that baby boomer bottled spirit,
Exactly.
bringing warmth to the machine. And looking at JobStart, I think he had issues with his own heart and following his own heart, and died of a rare, cancer. So a lot of baby boomers have checked out a little early, and Master One Feather, I want to give you time to respond to 8990. Where were you, sir, in that change of baby boomer heart?
Well, I think that was definitely a major life change cycle for me, because I had for the previous 20 years spent most of my time in a very nomadic state. I was traveling all over the country, and especially the Pacific Rim area, Japan, and those regions. And then in 1990, I had a series of events that kind of took me into that next stage of my life, where I ended up coming back to the Midwest and settling in, and at the same time going through a tremendous cycle of discovery, because all of my ancestry that goes back to the 1700s is linked to southwestern Michigan and then Chicago itself, and that's on the Native American side. So I grew up with a grandfather who was a Native American mystic who very rarely talked, and yet we had these profound conversations in the midst of silence, which I always thought was fascinating. But so it started me off on a journey of really identifying my Native American image and identity, and so for the first time I ended up becoming anchored in a region, and from 92 on I've been largely in the Chicago area.
So you found your heart, you found your home, I would say, then at Jupiter Wind and Wheel that time.
Well, I found the next stage.
Okay, Pisces.
Yeah,
with you, Pisces.
Yeah,
It's never an end. I know.
The next thread in the tapestry became very visible, I guess you could say, because at that point, I was able to really explore Native American spirituality on a kind of a quantum level, because I started meeting people who were very entrenched in mystical Native American spirituality. People that I probably would not have crossed the paths with had I been on the West Coast or the East Coast. Mm-hmm. They were people who were tribes people who were, living on reservations and hanging out at the American Indian Center and places like that. So it was, in fact, a whole new, uh, or the beginnings of a whole new cycle for me. And then in 96 and 97, I completely segued out of the fine art I was doing because I had been traveling and living on my watercolors. And in 96, I started doing readings. By 98, I was completely committed to doing readings for people, and I guess you could say really amping up the journey into the spiritual realm.
In the spiritual. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I would say that was Pluto. I was just going to say, I think you mentioned that. Oh, I want to go back just a little bit with your story because you mentioned that Jupiter was in Leo in '66, but you said '69 was a real shift in the conscious, and that's when Jupiter went into Libra, by the way. Then in 1990, Jupiter goes into Leo, and then we elect Clinton when Jupiter goes into Libra. But in 96, you mentioned going into spirituality, because in 96, Pluto goes into Sagittarius. So you mentioned in the 70s, in Neptune and Sag, y'all had chased after your spiritual visions and whatnot. 96, Pluto goes into Sagittarius, which is like, okay, time for us to now face whatever this transformation of our belief structure is. And then the next time Jupiter is in Leo is 2002, right after 9/11. Right after 9/11. So you went out into Lightwork World when Pluto went into Sagittarius and started doing spirituality, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Vincent, I want to ask, did you have a change of spirituality back out of the 80s with out of corporate Apple, Vincent, when Pluto went into Sag somewhere in the mid? Did you suddenly go spiritual again, flip back?
What time frame are you speaking about?
Well, we're speaking, Master One Feather, we were speaking about how you guys studied spirituality in the 70s, and then Pluto went into Sag actually in the mid-90s, 95, 96, and Master One Feather was sharing that that's when he went from watercolors to doing readings. I was wondering, you were working for Apple at the time, in that time, right?
Yes, in the 96, 97 through 2000. Right.
Okay, so you were actually more corporate than ever. So you weren't. So at that point, you went more corporate than ever. So where were you, gentlemen, emotionally with your hearts? And I'm bringing it back to the baby boom, just so we have, so we stay on the circle of wisdom. Where were you then in 2002 in your stories with Jupiter and Leo? One more time. Should we start with Vincent? You start. We'll go back to Mount Woodford.
Well, I think it was another interesting period. I started a company. I call it Moksha. I think I told you about that. When I broke off on my own, I started a company called Moksha, and it was very much focused on technology still through about really until but at that very period of time, I began to develop an affinity for the tarot, and I turned from all the things I was studying with the Eastern mind and turned it back to the Western mind, and started to read the teachings of Paul Foster Case, and did a lot more study in Western astrology because I had some exposure to Eastern astrology, but also very much in the way of the tarot. So I did that for a stretch of time. You're right about that introspection. That was a period of introspection for me.
Master One, where did you, and I want to get us a chance to talk about today's Jupiter and Leo, but I think this has been a fascinating discussion on how things shift. In 2002, sir, you are doing readings in Lightwork. The Secret has come out. Where does your heart change at that point?
I went through The Secret BS probably by 98. I had played with that whole idea of manifesting everything your heart desires, and came to the realization that a lot of times the heart that you're listening to is the heart of the ego, and that's going to get you more deeply embedded in things that are not going to be to your advantage. So by 97, I had come into contact with A Course in Miracles, which I think is...
Right. That was another big... Yeah,
that was
spiritual
when
wave, let's say.
Blossomed of a whole different level of spiritual awakening. And by 2002, I was really having to deal with the idea of identity because I'd had a couple of surgeries in the early 90s, and by 97 I had developed some complications, and by 2002, 2003, I had entered into a real period of crisis and stress around my physical being. In 2005, I collapsed and had my first or my second death experience, and and all of this, I think, was designed by my own higher self to buoy me up out of that addiction to physical sensation. So as I began to step out of identifying myself as a physical being and shifting my attention to my identity as a spiritual being, I discovered that there was a lot of clearing that I felt like was going on over a timeline of 3, 4, 5,000 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Multiple past life experiences.
Right, lots of clarity. And let me ask you, sir, were they heart issues?
No, they were not.
A lot of baby
it
boomers
was,
had heart
it was
issues.
the intestines.
Got you, digestion and whatnot, Virgo consciousness, Virgo ingestion. So yeah, a lot of baby boomers, I was just going to say, the baby boomers are the ones that got 1 out of 2 divorce. I think an issue of the heart. I think dealing with boundaries of the heart. The baby boomers, I think, are all dying of heart disease, especially baby boomer women dying of heart disease, again, protecting the heart. But I want to zip, and so we have a chance for a circle of wisdom discussion about where things are now. And so Master One Feather starts to practice his spirituality. Vincent, you become creative, which is the next, I think, direction of, you get in your creative. You start doing watercolor painting, basically, in the form of coding. And then that brings us to this point where Jupiter has now entered Leo here in 2014 and will stay in Leo until the end of 2015. So here we are once again, my friends, with an investment into the heart. And I want to hear from each of you about where your heart is at this point in the journey of following and protecting your heart. Vincent, tell us where are you now, sir, at this cycle?
Well, it's interesting. After 35 years of marriage, my wife and I have gone in different directions. So,
sorry about that.
This last year and a half has been, I think, in a way, an acceleration. I look at it as a complete dismantlement. Everything that I sort of structured over the past years has just come undone, completely undone, and I'm happy about it. I really have gotten into a space where I'm comfortable that I need to let all of this go. I think there was an interruption in the earlier path, and it was a necessary interruption. I had to go through what I went through, but I find I'm rejoining feelings and a path that I had walked through in the past, and I think it's a reawakening, and I have a lot of excitement about it. I'm still very tender with it. There's a lot of emotion tied up in it as well, but still I feel a comfort, sort of an understanding that this is going to come out in the place now where I need it, not what I need to be on the ego sense, but where I need to be on an internal sense, on a reconnection with what I had, some of the experiences I had in the past. So I'm very happy about that. I think you called it my third time around, and
right, yeah.
I think
300's a charm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think this third time around I'm going to try to make it right. So things are happening very quickly for me.
And Master One Feather, I want to point out real quick. I want to hear where your heart is at the moment. But interestingly enough, I just realized listening to you speak that Jupiter's in Leo now, and probably when Jupiter goes in Libra, we may end up electing Hillary Clinton, which would be a repeat of the vibration of early 90s. So interesting. Master One Feather, where's your heart these days?
Well, right now I guess I'm in that exposing all to all mode. I'm really zeroing in on the idea of putting together events next year around the country, and taking everything to the next level, doing workshops that involve um, all of the practices that those of us in this metaphysical community engage in, tarot, astrology, um, the I Ching, numerology, all the different forms of divination, and bringing it full circle, bringing it back to a grounding in A Course in Miracles, and looking at what the potential is to use these modalities to transcend our attachment or our addiction to the physical experiences that we're having.
Kind of hard not to be addicted to it too.
Pardon me?
I have to say, in defense of the human race, it's hard not to be addicted to it.
Well, no, I'm saying this, but that's the one thing that is inevitable in this life is that the outcome is death, and I think that you go back and look at the final era of Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, when he consciously stepped out of his body and had a huge amount of documentation with the LA County Coroner's Office about the actual event.
Huh.
So within that, what I am envisioning is getting people to accept the idea that you don't have to die, but you can transcend the body and really claim your true sense of power, your true sense of identity. Because really, when you stop and think about it, this is kind of a shabby thing that we've built for ourselves. When a microcosm can ravage the body, right now we've got Ebola getting ready to amp up, and we had the AIDS epidemic, we had bubonic plague, we've had this epidemic, that epidemic. The human body is filled with grace and beauty, but it is the most fragile thing on the planet. And if we attach ourselves to that body, it's ephemeral. It's ultimately going to vanish right in our fingers. So I think that my next stage, and what I'm feeling very compelled to doing, is to start creating events that get people into more of a mindset of making their spirituality hands-on and utilizing that spiritual theme to rise above all of the dysfunction and all of the brokenness of the material experience here on planet Earth.
So it sounds like, if I may come full circle, that you're back in your 1966 Jupiter and Leo self.
Well, not so much.
Well, I mean, not completely. I don't. Come on, work with me here. It's a TV show, but it's like if we're gonna keep, if life is a spiral staircase, I'm trying to identify where we are in that spiral staircase. Each time we're on the staircase, we're higher, but we see somewhat of the same view. So that's what I was referring to. Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, music is very much an integral part of this vision I have of these events that I want to start planning to have. And one of my good friend of musicians is a Jewish man who grew up in Israel, landed in New York, and had 20 years of creating music for the Hollywood community, did all the music for Nickelodeon and things like that. And then he went back to Israel and really was feeling very torn, almost ravaged by the conflict and the angst and the pain that was going on in the Middle East. And he started to explore music as the common language. Mm-hmm. And the more he looked into the historical music, the more it became apparent that the music of the Jews, the Christians, and the Arabs all have the same foundation. It's all essentially the same tune being expressed in slightly different ways. So
I imagine.
I want to integrate music into this broader picture and acknowledge music as one of our common languages that we can use as a tool to communicate and to learn how to listen to and understand and appreciate each other.
Yeah, I think music is absolutely the common ground, and I'm excited that Steve Jobs and Apple and other people of your generation have made music so much more accessible to the world. And I personally believe that music is our salvation. Of course, Vincent started there in Jupiter and Leo in '66. That's where he was on the road with music. I want to give just for 1 second Joel an opportunity to speak. You've been watching this whole program, sir. Before we wrap up, maybe you have a 1990 Jupiter in Leo observation in one now that you'd like to share, or any observation about your heart, sir, as a younger lad?
Yeah, I can stream through that pretty quickly. In 1990 is when me and my parents moved from Portugal to Canada, and so that unto itself was a complete change on my path, and seeking a lot of protection from my heart because I was in an alien world to me. Everything was scary, and there was a lot of trauma to deal with. And so I guess fast forward to another 12 years, having gone through all that, I feel like when I was 22, that's when I was in, I moved again to Ottawa, and I was doing a 3-year college program there, and I was exposed to many things there that could have, I could have abridged my way into the realms of spirituality and holistic developments and all sorts of things in that manner. But I shied away from it to my detriment. However, I suppose I needed another 10, 12 years to get to where I am now, where everything's come yet again full circle, and I've been engaged with so many opportunities to engage in numerous spiritual communities, and to find myself truly what am I here to do, and especially encountering these sort of similar trends over and over again, even though it's only been like 3 times now. But where I'm at with my heart now is coming back a lot to what Master One Feather was referring to. I have continuously, through my progression, realized that obviously we're so much more than just a physical shell. But I mean, this physical shell, I really honor it as a perfect piece of machinery that operates consciousness, because it is so self-regulating if we just allow it to be that, instead of poisoning it and getting in its way all the time through our human experience. But that's what I want to bring out to share with people, and is this element of self-empowerment. As I myself am on a journey of self-empowerment, I want to bring to people this that connection to this sense of you don't need to identify with everything in your life with this external world, because that's very superficial. It's short-lived, and it always leads to addiction. It always leads to wanting more, until you break that cycle and realize that there's more to connect with, what the camaraderie of others, the oneness within yourself, and your connection to divine. And these are things that we don't have really any mainstream rituals in our culture here in the Western world that embodies that development of connection to self and connection to divine. So this has become really important for me, and I feel like I'm kind of coming back to something you said in a reading you did with me, Christopher, that I'd be starting like my own religion, so to speak. Not a religion, but kind of like a following, if you will. And I see how it's all coming into that alignment now, because I'm able to piece all these different elements of all the communities that I've been a part of, and all the cultures I've crossed with, and everything I can only imagine I will cross in the next couple of years, or even just the next year, and really create something that will impart, I think, a nice contribution to the spiritual awakening on this planet.
All right, and I think that's very Saturn, and I'm behind you 100%. I'm behind all 3 of you gentlemen. I think Saturn in Sagittarius, which happens in the Christmas Eve of this year, will be Saturn is the responsible energy, so suddenly we're going to get very responsible Saturn about what we believe Sagittarius. And looking back, in the cycles and circles of mankind, Pluto was in Capricorn in the 1700s, and when Saturn went into Sagittarius, suddenly there was this philosophical debate among the colonialists of the United States of, I don't know if British rule is going to work. The Stamp Act pissed everyone off, and there was all this kind of discussion. Another interesting cycle and circle I wanted to bring up is that in 1978, when Jupiter went into Leo, that was the release of Star Wars, was in 77. So Star Wars kind of put in this mystical, this energy in 77 that carried over in 78, and here we're going to have a new Star Wars come out again in 2015, the next generation of Star Wars, which in a lot of ways, I hate to say it, you mentioned, Joel, you're right. Where are we getting our spirituality? Where are we coming together as a community? Even the baby boomers on this show went to other countries to do it. You know what I mean? I think Star Wars is one of our one church event of our culture. But to wrap up this show, gentlemen, I want to hear from each of you on as far as where your heart is and where it's going here on this solar eclipse tomorrow. Because I really think that to close the circle of discussion, a lot of this comes down to, according to the astrology, a lot of this comes down to protecting our heart. And in each one of these 66, 78, each one of these moments, the baby boomer in particular, but everyone on Earth has the opportunity of protecting their heart. And protecting, by the way, is taking time and space for what's important to you. Protecting is not letting the bad guys in right now at the moment. Protecting is creating space for what your heart wants next, all these things. So I want to hear from each of you on where are you drawing circles for yourself in your life. Master One Feather, where are you going to draw circles tomorrow on the eclipse?
Well, I think really, again, it goes back to the idea that I first introduced as we started this dialogue, which was the really embracing my invulnerability, really being able to get beyond fear. I think fear is the mind killer, as the people in Dune, if you remember the movie, we're always very much aware of. Fear is the thing that destroys us from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And so I'm working more and more and more in that direction, shifting my identity to that space of being, a purely spiritual being, and thereby embracing my invulnerability. And it's like, take your best shot, but you can't hurt this one.
So that sounds like, I have to just say, I mean, it sounds like you have built a protection around your heart that will suit you there. That's excellent. And for you, it's did you say invulnerability?
Invulnerability, yes. I don't feel like anybody should be afraid of anything. And if you're fully invested in who you are as a spiritual being, then you're no longer in that fight or flight mode. You're no longer trying to protect yourself and trying to, move people out of your life that are going to compromise you. You're no longer having a fear reaction. You can respond to all of the different elements that arrive in your life with a strong sense of power and love. Mm-hmm. And the power of love is what it is that transforms the things that we encounter.
So you're suggesting that maybe perhaps all along the baby boom has had fear in their heart, and it has been about protecting your heart from fear and allowing love to persevere. That's what I think I hear you say.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to get the overview. I think a lot of us had so many tragic events in past lifetimes that we really entombed ourselves in fear because we had entombed ourselves in the flesh. And it's only when we are non-corporeal beings that we have nothing to fear.
Yeah, and not feel entombed, so to speak.
Right.
Vincent, sir, where are you? Where are you today? You have a very tender heart. You mentioned you're doing a lot of healing at this particular moment. What's your philosophy on going forward, love and creativity?
I think mostly my concentration seems to be, excuse me, on getting out of the way. Just I'd like to use some of the words that Master One Feather used at the beginning of the show to become transparent as much as possible, not to use the ego, and try to the best way of my ability to channel as much as I can, and in that way give back. That's what I'm hoping.
Well, excellent, and I'm actually hoping that the baby boom, and the reason why I want to have this topic is because I really believe that the baby boom generation is so key, still essential to the Earth's salvation, literally. And if as you retire and move into your next 30-year cycle, we're counting on you, says the younger generation, to carry that light in your heart and continue on the path that you began, because my children need legacies to follow. So don't give up. Keep moving forward is my lesson, my message to you guys. And this is really a point where we should probably cycle it up. Joel, I'd love to have you back, sir, and talk a little deeper. In fact, Master One Feather, what do you say we talk about fight versus flight next episode?
Sure. That's what most of us are engaged in 90% of our lives. So yes, absolutely.
Seems like a good topic for Scorpio, fight versus flight. Those are the two black and white Scorpio options, are they not? And Joel, I invite you back, sir, to share with us where you're going and what you're teaching, and let's talk fight versus flight. And I want to thank Vincent for joining us and sharing your personal story with us today, sir. You're welcome back anytime with your combined wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you. I love you and I appreciate you, sir.
Thank you very much.
And you can reach us always. I'm on Namaste Today, 5 days a week. I'm now shifting that to 5 days a week, putting a boundary there, giving myself my weekends. And Master One Feather show is available. His link is in the description of this video. So click on his link and go check out his Visions show. And we will see you in 7 days with more spiritual enlightenment. Until then, stay in your hearts, my friend. Protect your heart, in this next transformation. And until then, live, love, be. Thanks, folks.